Hello, my name is Frank. I spent 40 years building a company from scratch, late nights, missed birthdays, and dreams deferred. At a board meeting I thought was routine, my own son stood up, smiled, and said, "We need younger minds at the table." Then he fired me, in front of everyone. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I just stared at the son I once taught how to ride a bike, and nodded. What he didn't know was that I still held controlling shares, hidden through trusts his mother helped me set up before she passed. He wanted the spotlight. He forgot who built the stage. Want to know what happened when I walked back in with the lawyers? Stick around, and let me know what city you're watching from. The morning sun filtered softly through the blinds as I adjusted the collar of my only navy blue suit. I hadn't worn it since my wife's funeral, and as I looked in the mirror, I could almost hear her saying, "Straighten your tie, Frank." First impressions last. I smiled at the thought. Bittersweet. Today was supposed to be the beginning of the end, the celebration of a journey I'd started 42 years ago. Building Whitmore Industrial from the ground up with nothing but grit and blistered hands. I thought the retirement party was next Friday. That's what the original email said. But just as I was finishing my coffee, my assistant, Jill, texted, "They moved it to today, remember?" My brow furrowed. I didn't remember, but I chalked it up to age. Happens. Still, something about the last-minute change tugged at the back of my mind. I grabbed my handwritten speech, carefully folded in my coat pocket, and stepped into the Texas heat, heart pounding with pride and nostalgia. I'd worked hard. I'd earned this moment. Tyler, my son, had helped in the later years, and I was proud of him. He was sharp, ambitious, maybe too ambitious. The parking lot was half empty when I arrived. Odd. Said it was nearly noon, the supposed start of the event. I figured maybe people were running late. The reception desk was unmanned. I walked the familiar halls, hearing faint voices behind the closed doors of the event hall. I straightened my shoulders and entered. Muted conversations died down as I stepped in. The room felt off. No slideshow of company milestones. No framed pictures of me through the years. No banner saying, "Happy Retirement, Frank." Just a simple podium. A cluster of suited board members near the front. And Tyler, standing center stage in a sleek, dark suit I'd never seen before. He looked like he belonged there, but something about his posture made me pause. People smiled, but the kind of smile you offer out of politeness, not celebration. I nodded at a few familiar faces. Some nodded back, most looked away. I approached Tyler, expecting a warm embrace. "Hey, son." He turned, lips curling into a practiced grin. "Dad." "You made it. Good." No hug, no happy retirement. Just those 3 words, crisp and professional. He didn't even look me in the eye. My stomach tightened. As I settled into a seat near the front, I scanned the room. Young staffers whispered in corners. A few glanced my way, then quickly looked down. Jill didn't show. Neither did half the department heads I'd mentored for decades. No flowers, no slideshow, not even a damn cake. I clutched the speech in my pocket a little tighter, trying to dismiss the growing sense of unease. Maybe they were saving the celebration for later. Maybe this was just the formality. Then came the tap. Tyler lifted his champagne glass and gently tapped it with a pen. The room quieted. I straightened up, ready for the handoff, the kind words, the memories, the moment. "Thank you all for being here," Tyler began, voice smooth, confident. "It's with great honor that I step in today as the new CEO of Whitmore Industrial." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. There was no preamble, no mention of my name, no thanks to the man who built the company from concrete and sweat, no recognition, just a clean, surgical cut. I blinked. The room erupted in cautious applause, the kind you give when you're not sure if it's the right time to clap. My mouth went dry. I glanced around. People clapped, then looked at me with awkward half-smiles, like they were witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Tyler continued about modernizing vision and agile leadership. I didn't hear much. I was too busy trying to stop my heart from crawling up my throat. My speech felt heavy in my pocket now. I'd written about legacy, about passing the torch, about gratitude, but there was no torch to pass. He'd already taken it. Weeks ago, it seemed, and didn't bother telling me. When the room began to mingle, I stood up and approached him. "Tyler," I said quietly, "you didn't think I deserved a mention?" He turned to me, expression unreadable. "Dad, it's time for younger minds at the table. It's nothing personal." Nothing personal? After 4 decades? I thought this was my retirement party. He shrugged. "Technically, it is, but we agreed on a smooth transition. You said you trusted me. I trusted you to be honest." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Sometimes honesty slows things down. I looked around. Board members avoided my gaze. A few sipped their drinks, pretending not to hear. I didn't say another word. I just walked, past the cold champagne, past the staffers who couldn't meet my eye, past the door I had walked through as CEO for more than half my life. The Texas heat hit me again as I stepped into the parking lot, but this time, it wasn't welcome. I sat on the hood of my car, staring at the concrete. My hands trembled slightly. It wasn't the betrayal that hurt most. It was the realization that Tyler had been planning this for a while, quietly, efficiently, and today wasn't a celebration, it was a dismissal, a public execution in a tailored suit. I woke up on the living room couch, still in my suit from yesterday. The tie was halfway undone, my shirt creased and sticking uncomfortably to my back. A dull ache throbbed behind my eyes, the kind that follows a night where sleep never truly comes. I hadn't even made it to the bedroom. The untouched retirement speech was still folded neatly in my coat pocket, pressing against my ribs like a cruel joke. I reached for it but stopped halfway, letting my hand fall to my lap. What was the point? No one clapped. No one listened. Hell, no one even cared I showed up. I shuffled into the kitchen, each step heavy. The coffee pot hissed as I filled it with water. I moved slowly, like an old machine left out in the rain too long. While it brewed, I stared out the back window. Same view I had the day I founded the company. The oak tree. The fence I built myself. The patch of grass where Tyler used to kick a ball while I sketched out warehouse plans on the porch. Now, that boy was gone, replaced by someone cold, calculated. I reached up to the frame on the counter. My wife, June, still smiling in that photo from our anniversary at Lake Travis. They didn't even clap. "Junie," I muttered, running my thumb over the glass. 42 years and I left with boxed up memories and a nod. I exhaled. "He didn't even mention your name." The silence in the house stretched long. I drank my coffee slowly, not because I was enjoying it, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I should have seen this coming. The late-night board meetings I wasn't invited to, the memos that never landed on my desk. The way Tyler had stopped asking for advice months ago, but I wanted to believe the best of him. I wanted to believe he still saw me as his father, not as an obstacle. I couldn't sit with that silence any longer. I grabbed my keys. The drive to the office was muscle memory. I'd made that trip more times than I could count. But as I pulled into the lot, something felt off, not just emotionally, but physically. My parking spot, the one that used to say, Founder CEO, now had a new plaque. Executive reserved. No name, just that. I stared at it for a moment before pulling into a visitor slot. My fingers hesitated at the keycard sensor. When the light flashed red, I didn't even flinch. Of course. I knocked on the glass until the security guard, young, fresh-faced, and avoiding my eyes, let me in. "Just here to grab my things," I said quietly. He nodded, saying nothing. Inside, the walls felt colder. Hallways where I once exchanged firm handshakes and inside jokes now echoed with unfamiliar footsteps and hushed tones. Staff passed me by like I was invisible. Or worse, a ghost. Maria, my assistant for nearly a decade, was standing at the desk outside my old office. She turned, eyes wide. "Mr. Whitmore, Frank, I didn't expect you today." "Clearly," I replied, forcing a smile. "I'm just here to collect a few things." She stepped aside, nervously fidgeting with her pen. I pushed the door open, or tried to. It was locked. "Already?" I asked. She winced. They They reassigned it this morning. Said you'd want your things boxed. I pushed the door open once she unlocked it. My desk was bare. The shelves where I kept awards, photos of me and June, old blueprints, all cleared. Cardboard boxes sat in a neat row along the wall, sealed and labeled, without asking. Who packed these? I asked. Facilities, she whispered. They came in at 6. I turned to her. Maria, did you know? She looked down. Frank, I'm so sorry. I stepped closer, my voice low. Tell me. Her hands trembled as she reached into her drawer. There were emails from Tyler, weeks ago. He told me not to forward certain things to you. Memos, board meetings, budget reallocations. I felt the ground tilt slightly beneath me. How long? She pulled out a folder. Since early April. He called it the succession strategy. Said it had to be discreet. Said it was your idea to step back. That's a lie. I know. She handed me the folder. Inside were printed emails. Tyler's name, dates, directives, my name, absent from every major decision. I wanted to say something, Maria continued, tears forming. But I was scared. I needed the job. My mom's insurance. You don't have to explain, I said quietly, closing the folder. You're not the villain here. She nodded, silent. I left the office carrying the folder and nothing else. The boxes could wait. Back in my car, I sat in silence. The printed pages rested in my lap like evidence in a courtroom. Each line, each timestamp, drove a nail deeper into what I'd built. He'd planned this, systematically, strategically, and I hadn't seen it coming. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I clenched my jaw. So he wanted the throne. Let's see how he handles the crown. I spent most of the afternoon preparing the meal, though no one had asked for it. The house smelled like rosemary and baked cheese, just like it used to when June made her signature chicken and rice casserole for family night. I found her old recipe card tucked behind a cookbook, corners yellowed, her handwriting steady and warm. Holding it in my hand brought back a quiet ache, not from grief, but from longing. Longing for the version of this family that used to gather in this same kitchen and laugh so loud it shook the windows. I laid the table with care, each plate aligned, the good silverware polished, cloth napkins folded into neat triangles. Ritual gave me something to hold on to. For 30 years, setting the table had been my unspoken way of saying, "You matter. We're still here." I had just placed the casserole in the center when the front door opened. Tyler strolled in without knocking, phone pressed to his ear. He gave me a 1-second glance, then walked straight into the living room, still mid-conversation. Yeah, margins look good. If we pull the plug on Dallas, we free up capital by Q4. No, don't loop him in. Not yet. No greeting. No, thanks for dinner. Dad. Just business. Erica arrived next. Hair perfect, holding a designer bag I didn't recognize. She air-kissed my cheek like we were strangers at a benefit gala. Ooh, smells. Comforting, she said, drawing out the word like it was a compliment for an old couch. You've still got it, Frank. My grandson, Max, trailed behind, tapping away on his phone. Can we eat fast? I've got a stream in 30. He slouched into the chair like he was doing us a favor. I offered a warm smile. He didn't look up. We sat, but it didn't feel like we were together. I watched forks move, mouths chew, heads nod to things I didn't say. They talked around me, not with me. Tyler launched into a monologue about quarterly growth, using terms like legacy realignment and exit optimization. He looked at Erica, at Max, never at me. Max laughed and added, "Guess you're officially human overhead. Grandpa." They all chuckled. I smiled, but my insides burned. I reached for the salad bowl, trying to lighten the mood. You know, your mom used to say this dish could make a peace treaty between feuding cousins. Remember the summer of '98? Tyler, you and Greg... Anyway, Tyler cut in, waving a hand. Dad, we're discussing growth strategies, not casserole diplomacy. I froze mid-sentence. He didn't even realize what he'd done. Or maybe he did. It used to be me helping him write his business school essays, burning midnight oil at this very table. I'd stayed up proofreading while June brewed extra coffee, proud of how smart our boy was. Now, he couldn't spare 5 seconds to hear a memory. I looked around the table. Erica was nodding at Tyler's every word, sipping wine like she belonged at the head of some corporate table. Max mimicked Tyler's hand gestures, saying something about trimming fat, while scooping another spoonful onto his plate. They weren't here for dinner, they were here for performance. Then, as I refilled Erica's glass, she smiled sweetly and said, "Frank, you've really kept this place nice. Big for one person, though, huh? Maybe it's time to think about something more manageable." My hand paused mid-pour. I mean, a cozy condo downtown, maybe, with concierge service and security, so you can focus on enjoying your retirement. She said it gently, like she was offering a piece of cake, but it hit like a brick to the chest. "Did I miss a conversation?" I asked quietly. Tyler kept chewing. "We've just been brainstorming some options. You know, long-term vision." "For my life?" I said, looking him in the eye for the first time that evening. Silence. Max had already gotten up, headed for the living room, mumbling something about setting up his studio lighting. Erica smiled again, oblivious, or pretending. I sat back in my chair, my appetite gone. The casserole was still warm, but something in me turned cold. The bottle of wine Tyler brought, some fancy label I didn't recognize, sat unopened on the counter. A symbol, I thought, of everything unshared between us now. Later, after dishes were rinsed and the conversation had evaporated, I stood by the door as they filed out. Max gave me a half-wave. "See ya, retired guy." It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it, like being retired meant irrelevant, surplus, fading. I nodded, hiding the sting behind a forced chuckle. "Take care, champ." They left without looking back. I stepped onto the porch alone, listening to the fading engine of Tyler's SUV. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees just beyond the fence. I looked up at the stars, same ones I used to show Max through a telescope we built together. I whispered, "They're rewriting me while I'm still here." And the sky said nothing back. The rain had started early that morning, tapping gently against the windows like a persistent memory. I stood by the kitchen sink, cradling a mug of black coffee that had long gone cold, staring through the fogged glass into the backyard. It was mid-morning, but the sky was gray, and the whole world seemed quieter under that soft drizzle. That's when I remembered the photo album, the one June used to keep in the garage, tucked away for special occasions. Max had a school project on family legacies, and I figured maybe, just maybe, a glimpse of his roots might make him look up from his phone for once. I grabbed my jacket, headed through the side door, and stepped into the garage. The air inside was thick with the scent of damp cardboard and oil. Dust motes floated like ghosts in the dim light. To most, it would look like a mess, but to me, it was a curated time capsule, built with June's hands and mine, one box at a time. Old paint cans lined the back shelf, next to rusted tools I hadn't touched in a decade. Tyler's high school trophies still sat on a beam near the ceiling, barely visible behind an old tarp. I traced a finger across one, Best Varsity Debater, 2004, and smiled. And then I saw it, the cabinet in the back corner, the one we always kept locked. It had once held things we didn't want the kids messing with, tax records, property paperwork, old legal files. I bent down and noticed faint scratch marks along the lock, not from age, from pressure, from force. I opened it. Inside, there were a few files, but the manila folder that had held the original trust deed for the house, the one June and I signed after refinancing in '92, was missing. I stood still for a long moment. That folder wasn't something you just lose. I had locked it myself. I remembered it clearly, tucked behind the gardening permits and stamped with a red original sticker on the corner. I had even sealed it in a plastic sleeve to keep it from getting damaged. And now, it was gone. My breath caught in my throat. I sat down on a stool, letting the weight of it settle. Then a question crept in. Had Tyler been in here? He got promoted 3 weeks ago. Showed up for dinner the day after, talking big about streamlining and liquid assets. Maybe he'd drop by while I was at the doctor's. Maybe he cleaned up for me. I needed answers, so I went next door. Mr. Howell was out on his porch, puffing a cigar like he always did when the weather turned wet. "Frank," he said with a nod, "you're up early." I forced a smile. "Say, Hal, did you see anyone around the garage last week? Maybe Tyler?" He squinted, scratched his jaw. "Yeah, actually, Tuesday morning. He had the trunk open, loading some boxes. I figured you were giving him stuff. Everything okay?" I nodded, but something inside me fractured a little more. I walked back slowly, my hands tucked in my jacket, replaying every interaction with Tyler over the past month, the firing, the staged dinner, the sudden suggestions to downsize. I had chalked it up to stress, ego, even carelessness. But now I saw patterns. In the kitchen, I sat down at the counter and powered up my old laptop. It wheezed to life. I opened my document folder and searched for the trust backup. I had scanned it years ago just in case. I found the file, but only the first 2 pages were intact. The final signature page was corrupted, unreadable. My stomach dropped. I switched to the calendar. Tyler had helped me set it up years ago, syncing our schedules so we didn't miss anything. That's when I saw it, a marked entry from 3 months back. Lawyer, Elliot meeting. I had never been told about it. I grabbed my phone, dialed Elliot's office. A calm voice answered. "Elliot Hart, how can I help you?" "Hi," I said, steadying my voice. "I'm calling to confirm a past appointment with Mr. Elliot. This is Frank Halden. Let me check. Oh yes, Mr. Halden. The file was handled by your son Tyler. Everything was completed last month." "Sorry, completed?" "Yes, the transfer paperwork was signed and filed. Tyler mentioned you were made aware." I hung up without another word. My hand trembled as I set the phone down. It wasn't just the document. It was everything. It wasn't the things they took. It was what they rewrote while I wasn't looking. I went back to the garage. Rain tapped louder now, steady and unrelenting. I found an old rag and wiped the dust from a hammer mounted on the wall, the same one I used to build Tyler's crib. The handle was worn, but solid, a symbol of the man I'd once been, a builder, a protector, a man who made sure things stayed in his name. I stared at the now empty cabinet and muttered, "Not yet. You don't get to erase me that easy." I pulled out a yellow notepad from the toolbox and began a list. What was taken? What was said? What still had my signature on it? Names, dates, files, all of it. This wasn't the end. It was reconnaissance. Before leaving, I noticed the small blinking light in the upper corner, the garage security camera. I had forgotten it was still active. I grabbed the laptop again, plugged in the feed, and began scrolling through the archive footage. Hours passed. Boxes being moved, empty garage, Max skateboarding in circles. Then it stopped me cold. On the screen, Tyler, entering quietly. At midnight, wearing gloves. When I saw Tyler's name light up on my phone screen, I stared at it like it might vanish. The text was short. "Family brunch this Saturday. Would mean a lot if you came." After weeks of silence, it read like a lifeline, and I, like a fool grasping at hope, took it. Back when Eleanor was still alive, Sunday brunches were sacred. She used to say, "You don't serve food to someone you plan to betray." Her words echoed in my head as I stood in front of my closet, deciding what to wear. I settled on her favorite flannel shirt, soft and faded, the one she always said brought out the blue in my eyes. I tucked a bottle of my homemade plum syrup under my arm, it used to be Tyler's favorite growing up, and drove the 30 miles to his place. The house had changed, bigger now, sleeker. It looked like it belonged in a magazine spread, white stone, glass railings, potted succulents that screamed interior designer. Inside, laughter spilled from the patio, the kind of curated joy that felt more like performance than warmth. Tyler's colleagues, dressed in matching neutral tones, mingled with crystal flutes in hand. Some nodded at me politely, most didn't look twice. I recognized no one, even the kids, my grandkids, looked uncomfortable in their little bow ties and matching shoes. like they'd been told to sit and smile but not speak. I took a seat at the far end of the long, whitewashed table, close to the kids. Far from Tyler, who sat surrounded by men in golf polos and women with frozen smiles, a server poured me a mimosa without asking. I raised it in silent thanks, though no one noticed. Conversation flowed like wine. Startups, hedge funds, Silicon Valley gossip. I tried to chime in once. A joke about the NASDAQ. No one laughed. Tyler didn't even look up. When I tried talking to Ellie, my granddaughter, she blinked at me and said, "Maybe later. Papa, Daddy said we have a schedule." A photographer circled, adjusting napkins and telling us to lean in more. But in between shots, no one leaned toward me. No one even asked how I'd been. The realization hit slowly. I wasn't here to be included. I was here to be displayed. Then Tyler rose, glass raised, the sunlight catching on his Rolex. "To generational wisdom," he said, voice smooth as butter. "To lessons learned from men who knew when to pass the torch." Laughter rippled around the table. Some light, some a little too pointed. I felt the blood drain from my face. Victoria, his wife, smiled tightly at me and rested her manicured hand on mine. "We're just so glad you're at peace with everything now." Her tone was syrupy, every word. A soft knife. I nodded, swallowed. My throat burned like I'd swallowed sand. I stood abruptly, muttering something about the bathroom, and walked inside. The cool air of the hallway wrapping around me like a shield. My hands shook. I pressed one to my chest and tried to breathe. Near the wine rack, someone shifted. I turned, and there she was. Norma, my former assistant, still wearing the same practical glasses and calm expression that had steadied me during 1,000 crises. "Norma?" My voice cracked. She stepped closer, keeping her voice low. I was invited, consulting on legacy branding, apparently. "I didn't know. I'm so sorry." "Sir." We stood there in the hush of polished tile and soft jazz, both knowing exactly what had happened without needing to say it aloud. She had seen it all, every veiled insult, every dismissive glance, and instead of offering pity, she offered quiet dignity. Before slipping away, she pressed a small envelope into my hand. A post-it note was stuck on top. "This shouldn't have gone through without your consent." I didn't open it, not yet. I slipped it into my pocket like it might burn if I looked too closely. Back on the patio, Tyler was posing for another shot, hand on Victoria's waist. Their children arranged like props. I didn't sit back down. I stood off to the side, watching. I wasn't part of the picture. I wasn't supposed to be. But I was there. When the brunch ended, I made my way to the car without saying goodbye. My fingers trembled as I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single document, an authorization transferring the brand rights and name of the company I built. My signature stared back at me, dated the day before they fired me. I stared at it, then at my reflection in the car window. Something in me cracked, then hardened. I barely slept Sunday night. The document Norma handed me sat on the kitchen table like it had its own heartbeat, pulsing with quiet menace. I must have read it 50 times, studied the curves, the strokes, the awkward slant of that signature. It had my name, sure, but not my hand. Something was off. I dug out my old checkbook from the junk drawer, flipping to the last used page. There it was, my usual G in Grayson. Neat, sharp, always closed. The one on Tyler's document had a tiny open loop, sloppy, careless. I frowned. I even pulled out my expired driver's license and held it up next to the transfer form. Same name, different truth. "When did I sign this?" I muttered into the dark. The only time I'd been in Tyler's office this year was for Christmas. He asked me to sign a holiday card for the staff. That was it. No forms, no papers, nothing that looked remotely like a contract. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. I grabbed the document, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it in the glove box of my old truck. I'd head to the county records office, pretend it was just some errand. Nothing serious, nothing angry, not yet. The records office smelled like old carpet and stale coffee. A young man at the front desk glanced up from his phone and asked, "What can I help you with today, sir?" I slid the envelope across the counter. "Just need to verify a document. Some brand ownership transfer that went through last week, he typed quickly, then raised an eyebrow. Oh, yeah. Says it was notarized last Thursday, signed off by Janet Lormeau. The name tugged at something in my memory. I'd seen her once, at Tyler's wedding, I think. Appreciate the help, I said, already pulling out my phone. Back in the truck, I searched her office and called under the pretense of setting a notary appointment. She answered on the third ring. Hi, Janet, Grayson Whitaker here. I was hoping to schedule a quick signing. Nothing major. Of course. Mr. Whitaker. I have a slot at 3:30 today if that works. Perfect. I brought the document with me, neatly folded, like a harmless form. Her office was small, 2 chairs, a ficus plant dying in the corner, and framed certificates lining the wall. She greeted me with a polite smile, but I could tell she didn't recognize me. As she reached for her pen, I stopped her, pulled out the folded paper. Before we get to mine, do you remember when we met last week? Her smile faltered. Last week? For this one. I slid the document forward. Her eyes flicked to the signature, then darted up to meet mine. Silence stretched like wire. Tyler said it was a backlog correction, she said finally. He said you couldn't come in but needed it pushed through fast. I didn't think... She swallowed. I'm sorry. I never saw you. I shouldn't have done it. I stared at her. The pen in her hand trembled slightly. You understand what this means? She nodded. Yes. I stood. Thank you, Janet. I won't need that 3:30 slot after all. The ride home felt longer than it was. My hands gripped the wheel like it might leap from the road. I wasn't shaking with fear. I was boiling with insult. He didn't think I'd notice. Or worse, didn't think I mattered enough to. I remembered teaching Tyler cursive at the kitchen table. G's are proud letters, I used to say, tracing them with his little hand wrapped in mine. They stand up straight. I pulled into a quiet parking lot behind the old diner, shut off the engine, and pulled a pen from the console. On a napkin, I wrote, Janet Lormeau. Admitted no in-person signature. Forgery by Tyler. Then I listed dates, conversations, the brunch, the moment Victoria touched my hand like she was brushing off a ghost. It all lined up now. The setup, the speech, the smile. They thought it was done. I sat for a while, watching a few teenagers skateboard past the alley. Their laughter bounced off the bricks and faded. I tucked the napkin into my shirt pocket and headed home. That evening, I called Norma. She answered on the first ring. Norma, I need a favor. Anything. I might need you to be a witness, and if things get messy, I need someone who knows where the bones are buried. She didn't even hesitate. You've got it. After hanging up, I went straight to the garage, dusted off an old lockbox and filled it with everything, copies of my license, checkbook, the document, and the napkin notes. I labeled the folder, if something happens to me. Then I added a sticky note on top, start here. Back inside, I printed pages about forgery, corporate fraud, and elder exploitation, highlighted key sections, underlined penalties, punched holes and tabbed each one. I wasn't a lawyer, but I'd been underestimated long enough to know that ignorance was expensive. Later, I stepped onto the porch. The sunset was soft, smeared across the sky like warm clay. You played with the wrong old man, I said aloud. My voice didn't shake. As I turned to head inside, I noticed something wedged in the mailbox, a thick, crisp envelope. No stamp, just a typed return address. Tyler's lawyer. Inside, a cease and desist. Apparently, I was slandering the company. Tyler's voice on the phone was unrecognizably warm. Dad, he said, drawing out the word like honey over bread. I was thinking maybe we could just talk. Like a real family again. No lawyers. Just us. There was a pause. Not awkward, but deliberate. Thursday evening, at my place? I stared at the screen long after the call ended. His words echoed in my ears, tangled with the voice of my late wife in my memory. Always give them one more chance than you should, but never a second more. I'd already given more chances than any father should, but somehow, her voice still had power over me. I walked into the den and pulled out the old photo album. I chose a picture from the summer of '91, Marianne holding baby Tyler at his baptism, sunlight catching in her hair like a halo. Maybe, just maybe, a piece of that love still lived in him. By Thursday evening, I'd dressed in my cleanest flannel and pressed khakis. The drive to Tyler's suburban home was quiet, but my mind roared with warnings. As I turned into his driveway, I caught my reflection in the windshield. I looked tired, but not broken. Inside, the living room was staged like a Christmas card. Wine glasses sparkled, snacks arranged just so. Everyone was already seated, except me. Tyler stood first, arms wide. "Dad, glad you came." I stepped inside, but the door closed behind me faster than it should have. Extended family I hadn't seen in years dotted the couch and chairs. Lorna, of course, perched like a statue, and even cousin Henry from Oregon, whom I hadn't seen since 2005. I was the only one standing. "Let's sit. Dad." Tyler gestured to the lone armchair directly across from him. I noticed how the lighting framed me. Clear line of sight to the coffee table, where a phone blinked softly. Lens pointed at my face. Tyler cleared his throat. "This isn't an ambush. We're worried. You've been forgetful, and your finances are complicated. We just want to talk." Lorna's voice was syrupy but sharp. "You've had trouble remembering things, haven't you? Last week, you couldn't find your keys for almost an hour. And you repeated yourself at dinner?" added Henry, as if rehearsed. Tyler slid a manila folder toward me. "Wellness check documents," he said casually, but I knew better. I opened it. Inside were forms requesting a mental competency evaluation. There was even a section filled out already. My name, my birthday, their signatures. "You think I'm losing it?" I asked, voice steady. "No one's accusing you," Tyler said quickly. "But we need to be proactive. You've got assets, the business. We just want to avoid confusion later." They were building a paper trail. This wasn't reconciliation. This was litigation in disguise. I scanned the room again. Lorna's eyes didn't flinch. Henry avoided mine, and the blinking red light on Tyler's phone kept recording. I tried to speak, but every sentence I began was interrupted. "Dad, let's not get emotional." "This isn't about taking sides," Lorna inserted. "We're just looking out for you," Henry said, parroting the line. I leaned back. Let them speak. Let them dig the hole deeper. Tyler started listing off minor incidents to prove I was declining. He even brought up the time I forgot the garage code, conveniently omitting that it had been changed without telling me. They wanted me to sign the papers. "Just to get the process started," Tyler said. I stood, not abruptly, not dramatically, just rose to my full height and let the silence settle. "You're not worried about me," I said. "You're building a case, and frankly, it's a sloppy one." They looked stunned for a heartbeat. Then the justifications started pouring in again, but I tuned them out. I reached into my coat pocket and placed the photo on the coffee table. Marianne's smile beamed up from 1991. "In case any of you forgot who raised this family." Without waiting for a response, I walked toward the door. The wine, the lighting, the positioning, every detail had been designed for manipulation. I opened the door, paused, and glanced over my shoulder. "This house doesn't smell like home anymore," I said. "It smells like a courtroom." I stepped out into the night, closing the door behind me with deliberate calm. Once in my truck, I reached under the seat and pulled out my burner phone, snapped photos of Tyler's recording setup through the window, zoomed in on the lapel mic barely visible on Lorna's cardigan. Then I drove. Not home. Not yet. I parked at the old diner off 14th Street and sipped coffee while scrolling through my contacts. There it was. Ray Menendez, poker buddy, former probate attorney, owed me for bailing him out of a Vegas bind years ago. I shot him a message. "Need to cash in that favor. Urgent." As I finished the last of the coffee, headlights flashed across the window. A knock on the glass. A man and woman in plain clothes held up badges. "Mr. Walker," the woman said, "we're from Adult Protective Services. We received a report regarding your mental competency. We need to speak with you." I didn't flinch, just nodded and said, "You're not the first ones tonight trying to decide what I'm capable of." My coffee had gone cold by the time the voicemail ended. The voice had been low and clear, with a calm steadiness I hadn't heard in years, until it called my name. "You don't know me well, dude, but I knew your wife better than your son ever could. Meet me tomorrow. I'll be at Darla's diner. I'll wait." I nearly deleted it. Probably another scam. Another false hope dangled in front of an old man hanging on to shreds. But then it hit me. There was a tone in her voice, a rhythm in how she said "your wife," that broke through the fog. Nancy, my late wife's best friend. They used to spend hours in the garden together, laughing until dusk. We'd lost touch decades ago after a falling out between the families, but Marianne always said Nancy had the kind of loyalty money couldn't touch. So the next morning, I drove 30 miles out to a diner I hadn't stepped foot in since Clinton was president. Darla's hadn't changed, still had that peeling green booth in the back corner and that sweet smell of cinnamon grease. Nancy was already there, sitting with a leather folder clasped in both hands like it was a Bible. She looked older, of course, hair silvered, face folded with life, but her eyes hadn't lost that sharp amber light. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, not smiling, not frowning, just watching. "I almost didn't," I replied, sliding into the booth. "But then I remembered how Marianne trusted you." She nodded slowly, then tapped the folder. "She gave me this years ago," she said. "Said to hold it until the kids stopped being children and started acting like wolves." I stared at the folder, my hands motionless. "She told me to give it to you if they ever tried to erase your name or dignity, said you'd know when that moment came." Nancy opened the folder, revealing a copy of the original will, signed, notarized, and full of handwritten notes in Marianne's familiar cursive, not the edited version Tyler had waved around, not the watered-down copy I'd been allowed to see. This one had teeth. "And Tyler?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "He called me 3 days after the funeral," Nancy said. "Asked if Marianne left anything behind. I lied, told him no. I didn't trust the way he asked. It sounded greedy." She slid another paper toward me, a sealed envelope, brittle and yellowed with age. My name was scrawled across the front in ink that had faded but not disappeared. I hesitated. "Go ahead," Nancy urged, folding her hands. I opened it slowly, unfolding the letter like it might disintegrate. "My love, if you're reading this, then things turned out exactly as I feared." She described her worries, how Tyler had grown cold, how Lorna had already been whispering about securing assets. Marianne had seen it coming, long before I was willing to admit it. "If they come for you, don't just stand your ground. Push." She'd created a trust fund with 2 branches, one public, one hidden under the name of a company we used to vacation with in Maine. She detailed where to look, who to call, what to say. "They will sell you for comfort. But I've left you power. They'll never see coming. Use it, not just to survive, but to win." Tears didn't fall. Not yet. What I felt wasn't grief. It was ignition, like a match finally striking against flint. Nancy watched me as I folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. "Why now?" I asked her. "Because she trusted me to know the moment," she said. "And when Tyler tried to get me to lie on record about your state of mind, I knew he was already digging your grave." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Thank you. I'm going back to quiet now," she said. I did what she asked. The rest is yours. I drove home in silence. But my mind was a thunderstorm. I made copies of everything, 3 sets. 1 stayed in my safe. 1 went to the bank, and 1 I wrapped in foil and buried beneath the rose bush she used to tend. Then I called Derek, old poker friend, now a trust litigation bulldog. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Well, if it isn't the man who once bluffed me out of a full house," he chuckled. "I need your eyes on a trust war." I said, "I've got the documents. Monday? I'll bring the bourbon. You bring the fire." That night, I sat by the fireplace with Marianne's letter resting on my chest. I could almost feel her there, watching, waiting for me to act. Then came the crack. A sudden smash from the front window. I rushed to the porch. Glass shards glittered on the floor like salt on ice. A rock lay on the rug, taped to it. A scrap of lined paper. Stop digging up the past, or we'll bury you with it. I stood in the cold night air. Heart steady. Pulse slow. They wanted a war. Good. I had the original terms. Monday morning air always had a stillness to it, like the world held its breath before the week began unraveling. Derek pulled up to my curb at 7:30 sharp, his black sedan gleaming like a lawyer's promise. I climbed in, holding the sealed envelope Nancy had given me 2 nights before. "You sure you're ready?" he asked without looking over. "No," I said, buckling in. "But I've been ready for years and just didn't know it." We drove in silence through county roads until we reached a discreet gray building off Main Street in St. Joseph. No logo, just a keypad lock and a small plaque. Anderson Private Estate Services. Derek pressed a buzzer, gave his name, and we were let in. A woman in her 60s greeted us with a firm handshake and steel in her eyes. "I'm Carol," she said. "Your wife made specific arrangements should this scenario arise." Her words were measured, but her tone had an undertone of reverence. "Come with me." We entered a narrow hallway, then into a soundproofed conference room with no windows, just a polished table, a small safe, and a file already waiting. Carol slid a document across the table. "This instruction," she began, "was signed by your wife 3 years ago. It states, if either of my children act against my husband's will or estate interest, release all assets under my maiden name." She handed me a pen. My hand trembled. Not from fear, but from something else. Vindication. Maybe. Once my ID was verified, she walked to the far wall and pressed her palm against a hidden panel. A mechanical click echoed, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing a modest safety deposit box labeled M. Langford Burke. Inside was a flash drive, a thick set of legal documents, and a faded Polaroid. Our wedding day. Marianne was laughing in the picture, her hand on my chest, her veil caught in the wind. I clenched it, feeling that familiar ache in my chest, the kind that comes with loving someone who saw further than you ever could. Derek connected the drive to his laptop, and as files loaded, he whistled low. "You might want to sit down for this," he said. The drive contained 2 scanned trusts, both signed and notarized months before Marianne's health declined. Trust A held nearly $500,000 in liquid assets. Trust B detailed ownership of 3 real estate properties across different counties, one of which was the very house Tyler had claimed as his. "She moved the title a year before she died," Derek muttered, skimming through clauses. "Under an LLC trust. You're the sole beneficiary. He's squatting in your house." Another file contained a handwritten addendum, scanned and dated. It read, "If you're reading this, they tried to erase you, so I wrote you back in. Use this, not out of revenge, but to reclaim what's fair." My throat tightened. She always played the long game. Carol returned and laid down a new folder. "These are the activation documents. You're the legal trustee of both instruments. You can authorize withdrawal, sale, or litigation." I signed, slowly, carefully. My signature shook at first, but the final letter landed firm. Derek leaned back. "You now have standing, power, and they don't know what's coming." I looked at the wedding photo again, then tucked it in my coat pocket. We drove back as the late morning sun broke through Indiana's stubborn gray clouds. Derek tapped the steering wheel. "We hit 'em slow," he said. "Cease and desist first. Then we move on the house. After that, we talk to the press." "I'm not doing this for show," I said, my voice low. "I know," he said, "but sometimes justice needs a microphone." Back home, I sat at the kitchen table and penned the first of what would be many documents. One was a letter addressed to Tyler. "You're living in a house that doesn't belong to you. Attached is the deed. I suggest you vacate before this becomes a legal matter. Regards, Dad. I included a photocopy of the real title, bolded, dated, and sealed. I folded it neatly, placed it in an envelope, and handwrote his name on the front. Before sealing it, I whispered, "Your mother gave you a home. You turned it into a weapon. Now watch me take it back." The next morning, I walked down to the mailbox, expecting flyers and bills. Instead, I found a small envelope, no return address. Inside were 6 photographs, each one showing me, through my bedroom window, asleep or reading. One photo had a message scrawled on the back. "This isn't over." I stood motionless in the rising sun, the wind biting through my shirt. But I didn't shiver. I folded the photos and carried them inside, then locked every door. If they wanted war, they were about to learn what it felt like to fight someone who had nothing left to lose, and everything to prove. I hadn't worn a jacket that sharp in years. It didn't hang loose on me like before, maybe because I'd finally filled out with something other than worry. I stood on Tyler's front porch at exactly 11:30 a.m., just like Derek said. The legal envelope felt heavier than it looked. I wasn't sure if it was the papers inside or the years of silence I was finally letting go of. Tyler opened the door wearing sweatpants and that smug grin he must have inherited from someone I never met. "Back to beg for a couch again, old man," he said, leaning against the frame like I was some salesman. I handed him the envelope without a word, just one sentence. "That's not your house anymore." His smirk wavered. He looked down at the envelope, his eyes catching the seal from the county court clerk. I didn't wait for him to open it. I turned and walked back to my car, parked across the street. Derek had planted a motion sensor camera on the lamppost facing the porch. Hidden inside the envelope was a tiny GPS tracker, taped behind the folded documents, just to confirm reaction, timing, everything. From the rearview mirror, I watched. Tyler stood frozen for a beat, then tore open the envelope like it had insulted him. His face morphed from confusion to rage within seconds. He threw his head back and shouted something I couldn't hear, then stormed inside. A few moments later, he re-emerged on the phone, pacing, gesturing, yelling, like clockwork. He had no idea this wasn't a warning. It was a trigger. Back at Derek's office, we replayed the footage frame by frame. Derek sipped his black coffee like it was just another Tuesday, but for me, it felt like the scales were finally tipping. Ben Torres, our private investigator, slid into the room holding a folder thick with screenshots and bank printouts. "He called 3 people right after you left. 2 were brokers. One's his lawyer." Derek nodded. "Exactly what we needed." Ben opened the folder. "Here's where it gets better. Tyler's been moving money from your joint retirement accounts. Signature mismatches. No power of attorney. Clean-cut forgery." I looked at the papers. But it wasn't the numbers that got to me. It was the timestamp on one transfer, made the same day I was in the hospital after the fall. The day he told me not to worry, that he'd handle the bills. "He's not just greedy," Derek said, eyes still on the folder. "He's reckless. And arrogant," Ben added. "He thinks he's untouchable." I didn't say anything for a while, just stared at the documents like they were written in another language. All these years, I thought staying quiet was a kind of dignity. Turns out, it was just letting the wolves eat with silverware. A line from my wife floated back to me. "Don't swing first, just own the ring." I nodded to Derek. "Let's move." The knock on the door came 20 minutes later. A court assistant, young, nervous, handed over the signed emergency injunction. Tyler couldn't touch anything tied to the trust now, not even the house. Derek's fingers flew across his keyboard, shooting off emails to the recorder's office and Tyler's attorney. "We'll take the house title back within 48 hours. In the meantime, the injunction freezes all accounts and assets under dispute." Tyler's lawyer called back within the hour, loud and dismissive on speaker. "He's not moving out." "This is absurd," Derek calmly replied. "Then the police will move him." I watched the panic start to ripple across the legal side of the call. His voice cracked just slightly. "We signed the retrieval forms." Derek pushed them toward me with a smile. "You've been waiting to say something, haven't you?" I nodded. "I've got it ready." "What's the line?" I stood, clearing my throat. You won't be dragged out. You'll walk out, or they'll carry you. That's the dignity you earned. Derek leaned back. Perfect. Before I left the office, I borrowed a quiet corner and called my granddaughter. She didn't answer, but I left a voicemail. Sweetheart, if they start saying I'm crazy again, don't believe them. I just got smart. On my way out of the courthouse, I spotted an old, rust-colored Cadillac parked along the curb. The woman stepping out was short, gray curls tucked under a sun hat, a thick brown envelope in her hands. Loretta? I asked. She smiled. Your wife told me to give this to you after you filed the papers. Said you'd know what to do. Inside the envelope was a letter and a small receipt for a safety deposit box. The location wasn't even in our state. On the back of the receipt, in my wife's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, Final Protection. Loretta touched my arm. She didn't plan for a war. She planned for a rebuild. She always saw what was coming. I folded the letter slowly, pressing it to my chest for a second. Then let's finish what she started. It was nearly dusk by the time I pulled into my driveway. The first thing I noticed was the front door, open just a sliver. There was no broken lock, no smashed glass, but the living room smelled like cologne. Expensive. Musky. Definitely not mine. The courthouse loomed ahead, its stone columns framed by early morning fog and the hum of broadcast vans lining the street. Microphones stood like metal flowers beneath tripods, and cameramen jostled for position behind yellow barriers. Reporters called out my name the moment I stepped from the car. But I kept walking, flanked only by Derek and Ben, no family on either side. It was fitting. I had come alone, just like I had weathered the past few years. A protester held up a sign reading, Protect Our Elders. Another read, Justice for Dad. I didn't recognize these people, yet their presence pressed something deep inside me. I'd lived quietly, tolerated the insults, the manipulation, the slow erasure of my dignity, just to keep peace. But peace bought with silence wasn't peace at all. It was complicity. A young reporter darted forward and called, Do you regret not speaking up sooner, sir? I paused for the cameras. Silence is safe until it becomes complicity. I didn't expect anyone to care. But behind me, I heard someone mutter, That's going viral. Later that clip would sweep through social media, attached to words like courage, justice, and dignity. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with a strange tension, audience benches filled, a live-stream camera blinking red at the back. The judge entered and said, Given public interest, this hearing will be fully recorded and remain open to the press. I glanced toward Tyler. He looked smug, sitting with his lawyer and tapping on his phone like he'd already won. He had no idea what was coming. Derek opened with calm, deliberate precision. Your Honor, this case isn't just about theft. It's about betrayal of familial trust and calculated deception. He presented security footage of Tyler storming into my house, yelling, Sign the damn papers or rot alone. The courtroom went still. Audible gasps rose behind me. Tyler's attorney shot up. Objection. Irrelevant and prejudicial. The judge didn't even blink. Overruled. Your client isn't on trial for yelling. He's on trial for theft. I sat motionless as the footage played on. I'd lived that moment. I remembered the bile in my throat, the fear that maybe I was losing everything. But now I just watched, my heart quiet. Ben testified next, detailing the financial trail. Mr. Tyler disguised asset transfers through dummy LLCs. We traced them all. The money moved from the estate into accounts controlled by entities that led back to Mr. Tyler's wife. Are you saying his wife is involved? The judge asked. Ben nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The paper trail confirms it. Online. The hearing gained traction. Hashtags like had Dad V's deceit and hashtag justice for Frank started trending. Strangers wrote things like, This man reminds me of my grandpa. Go get him, sir. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as someone's burden, but as someone worth listening to. Tyler finally took the stand, lips tight, jaw twitching. My father was being manipulated, he began, by these so-called professionals. They got in his head, made him suspicious of his own family. He was never mentally fit to handle the estate. The judge cut in. Did you forge your father's signature on the property lien? The silence stretched. I don't recall. Derek stood and handed over the document. This is the original lien with Mr. Tyler's signature. We also have multiple verified samples of the father's handwriting for comparison. The judge nodded slowly, then turned his head to the gallery. Mrs. Shannon Tyler. Please stand. Shannon stiffened. She was in the third row, trying to look detached. The judge lifted a different document. This bank record shows your authorization on a secondary transfer, one involving joint estate funds. She blinked. That's not... Someone forged that, but the judge simply raised a brow. Your signature has been verified by the bank. A third-party auditor confirms it matches your employment contracts. Tyler spun in his seat. You told me it was taken care of. You said, "Order!" The judge barked. I turned to face my son, not with fury, but a clarity I had earned. You thought stealing made you strong, but surviving trust. That's what makes a man. The courtroom hushed. Moments later, the judge delivered his ruling: full restitution of stolen funds, surrender of assets, and a court-mandated public apology, live-streamed. More than that, he ordered all prior accusations against me struck from the public record. My name was restored. Reporters outside were already typing headlines. The father who outsmarted his son, elder betrayal in the suburbs. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt the weight of it all. That night, back home, I placed my wife's photo on the mantel. Her eyes sparkled even through the old frame. You kept me steady, I whispered. Then I dialed Lily, my granddaughter. This time, she picked up. Grandpa? Her voice cracked. I saw everything. I'm sorry. It's all right, I said gently. You watched. That's more than most ever did. But before I could rest, the doorbell rang. Outside, on the porch, a plain white envelope sat atop the welcome mat. No return address. Just one word. Watch. Inside, a USB drive, and a note in block letters. Your son was just the front man. Check what's inside. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. I stared at it as sunlight filtered through the courthouse windows, casting long streaks across the wooden bench. My hand trembled slightly as I peeled it open. Inside wasn't money, or a letter, but a small USB. Taped to it was a sticky note, scribbled in sharp, all-caps handwriting. For the judge, trust no one. I looked up at Derek, who was sitting beside Ben near the defense table. They leaned in as I handed it over. Ben plugged it into his laptop and immediately his eyes widened. Encrypted files, offshore transfers, shell corporations, he muttered. Derek whispered, This goes way beyond just the house. The courtroom, half empty moments ago, was filling fast. Word had spread that something big was coming. The judge stepped back into chambers to prepare for an emergency motion. Meanwhile, Ben clicked on an audio file buried in the USB. A voice, clear, cruel, filled the room. Shannon. He's old. He won't even remember what he signed. By the time he figures it out, it'll be done. A gasp ran through the gallery. The judge returned, face pale. We're reopening the case immediately. Everyone stay seated. Then she walked in. A woman in a tailored gray suit, hair pulled back neatly, holding a slim briefcase. She wasn't part of any legal team I'd seen. She walked past Tyler without looking at him and stopped directly before the bench. Your Honor, my name is Melissa Walker. I have information relevant to this case. Everyone turned. Shannon sat frozen, eyes locked on the stranger. I felt a deep, slow realization stir in my gut. Melissa opened her case and pulled out 3 hard drives, labeled meticulously. She placed them gently before the judge. I used to work with Shannon. I'm her sister. Murmurs rippled. Shannon's jaw clenched. I was a compliance officer. Shannon and Tyler used our firm's access after I left to funnel funds from elderly clients into dummy accounts. I found out last year, when I saw what they did to him. She pointed to me. He reminded me of our father. He died penniless because of scams like this. Reporters scribbled furiously. One camera light blinked red. Melissa continued, calm but firm. I brought backup copies, internal emails, call logs, bank transactions. Tyler and Shannon weren't just after one man. They were part of a network. Shannon stood up, furious. You lied to me, she hissed at Melissa. This isn't your fight. But it was Tyler who broke. You told me it was just about the house, that it wasn't traceable. Now the room wasn't quiet. It was roaring. The judge banged the gavel. Order. I hadn't moved. I didn't need to. They were unraveling themselves. The judge called for recess and reconvened within the hour. When we returned, the verdict was ready. Mr. Tyler Prescott and Ms. Shannon Walker are hereby remanded into federal custody pending trial for felony elder fraud, conspiracy to commit financial abuse and wire fraud. All jointly acquired assets are seized. Bail is denied. A murmur of satisfaction swept through the crowd. I stood and asked to address the court. I don't want restitution, I said. Not a penny. I want every dollar they stole to go to a foundation that helps people like me, people they thought would stay quiet. I turned toward the cameras, just briefly. Some people wait for karma. I wrote mine into court filings. As they were led out, Shannon locked eyes with me, no longer defiant, just hollow. Outside, the headlines were already flying. Elder fraud ring exposed by one-man stand. Retired engineer dismantles multi-state scam with one USB. But I didn't bask in it. I walked outside into the morning sun, where peace met me on the courthouse steps. That afternoon, back home, I found a letter resting on my porch chair. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Grandpa, it read. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us. I'm proud of you. Lily. I sat down slowly, placing the letter beside the old framed photo of my wife. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The coffee in my hand steamed against the autumn air. I watched the street, quiet and unchanged, while the world beyond caught fire with news of what had just happened. My phone buzzed, a call from the local news, then another from a national network. I turned it off. Let them talk, I muttered. I've said enough. A bird landed on the porch rail, just for a moment. I watched it, then looked over my shoulder at the quote hanging inside the house, right by the doorway. The measure of a man isn't how loud he yells, but how long he stands.